everyone, this is Vernon sharing another upload to First Generation Transform, the channel that is dedicated to helping first generation candidate attorneys with tools, understandings and approaches that you can use in your transition and also smoother integration into the corporate world. In this two-part series, I will be speaking about lawyer personality. Now, as you can remember in the previous upload, I alluded to the concerns around mental health of law students. And when I say mental health, remember, I don't mean cuckoo, but rather the tendencies towards depression, being anxiety-ridden, overly cautious, having to see a psychologist, having antidepressants like I had to. Basically, if something goes bad or if something, the potential for something to go bad, just your ability to really to compound, that situation to the extent that it really overwhelms you much more sometimes than it sometimes should have. So in this part, I'll be giving you the narrative around lawyers and around the studies and papers that's been written regarding this thing of depression and anxiety. And in this part, very interestingly, I'll also be sharing, where the problem comes from, where the rubber hits the road, who the actual culprit is. So stick around. Just to give you a heads up, this topic is a little bit gloomy, but I have to be honest with you that I'm really glad to be sharing this topic with you because it helps to sensitize you to being mindful of really looking after yourself, because that's what I had to do as well after finding this out. And that's why I'm also sharing, these uploads, because I know how absolutely easy it is to create mental and emotional knots, and make things sometimes worse than they sometimes really are. So yeah, let's jump right in. In 1990, the Johns Hopkins University published a research paper with regards to research that they did, that was called The Occupations and the Prevalence of Major Depressive Disorder. And what they did was they took 104 occupations and they tested the employees, did research with employees with regards to the tendencies towards and rates of depression within those professions. 104. To cut a long story short, lawyers won with flying colors. It's not just that lawyers were number one, but lawyers, they found, were also 3 times more likely to suffer from depression or get depressed. Now, this is not anything new. A whole host of papers have been written around this topic, and research has been done as well. So as you can see from this paper, certain topics like the prevalence of depression, alcohol abuse and cocaine abuse among United States lawyers. Depression is the law's occupational hazard. Another interesting title is The Depressed Lawyer, Why Are So Many Lawyers So Unhappy? As you can see, there's a whole bunch of other papers that's been written as well. So you can see a lot has been written on this topic, and researchers were really intrigued about what the hell is going on. And what they've been doing is they started doing comparative studies because they weren't convinced, because they know that law isn't necessarily the only profession where there's so much pressure and so much demands and so much expectations, hence the Johns Hopkins study. So they did research and they found that other professions obviously also have high rates of expectations by clients. If it's a service industry or service profession like the law is, there's various different demands. But what they also then did was that they also looked within law and they looked at, whether it's the particular area of law, maybe that's making, people a bit more, prone to depression. Maybe it's the billing system, maybe it's, the hours of work. But again, they weren't too convinced because it's not as if other professions, law's not the most hardest working profession. You get it? And they also got it. So they were very, very intrigued about what the hell is going on. Now, this is not the craziest part. The crazy part is that while considering this, they also, and I think it was inevitable, they also went to law schools and did similar studies with regards to prevalence of depression and, testing law students' well-being. And what they found was shockingly similar results with regards to the trends with regards to attorneys, in that law students' rates of depression in comparison to other fields of study were a bit higher. Yeah. Now, as you can imagine, because I can imagine it, the researchers must have been pulling their hair out. So they've been doing comparative studies there as well. Medical students, with medical students, and with other students as well, to see, why is this high rate why is this tendency there within law students? And also what they then did was they also looked within within the study of law. So they looked at things like, has your fees been paid? Maybe it's you haven't been properly, integrated into university yet. Maybe it's the workload. Maybe you don't understand the work. Maybe you don't get on along with peers. Maybe, it's the lecturers, on and on and on. But again, what the researchers found was it's not as if other students don't have, generally speaking, as a generalization, don't have similar types of issues, right? But here's what they came down to with regards to law. And this is fascinating. And if you study law, you have to know this. But one of the earliest studies that's been done was done in 1986 by Dr. Andrew Benjamin. He studied law schools as well, one of the studies, and his study was called the role of legal education in producing psychological distress amongst law students and lawyers. Interesting. And what they wanted to do, the researchers, Dr. Benjamin and his researchers, they wanted to test the hypothesis that the process of legal education actually impairs the maintenance of emotional well-being in students. That's the hypothesis that they wanted to test, because they could see that it was happening, but they wanted to test it. And here's the results that they came up with. And when I heard about this, cold water in my face. They found that law students' well-being does go down, but it gets even more interesting than that. It goes down as early as the first 6 months of law school. Now, this to me was really hit me hard like a brick. Why? Because I can remember personally when I was my first 6 months, first 6 months, I was busy. I was walking to the library because I needed to prepare for my June Latin. I was going to prepare for my Latin exams, the June exams. I don't know who still does Latin, but anyway, preparing for my Latin, walking to the exams, and then suddenly, nowhere, no warning, I stood still physically while people were still walking past me. Stood still physically, and it's difficult to explain, but it's almost like a black cloud. That's the only way I can describe it. A black cloud came over me, but I had this heavy, heavy feeling of just this dark, gloomy, negative, just this depressing feeling come over me. And I can remember as clear as day the question that I asked myself, because I asked myself, like, what the hell am I doing here? And I was just standing still in my tracks. What the hell am I doing here? And it kind of freaked me out a little bit. After that, I didn't go to the library after all. I turned around in my tracks and, went to call. I had a girlfriend at the time, called her, and I said, I don't know what the hell is happening. It's just really scary. And then from there, I had to see a psychologist for many years while studying law. So when I heard about 6 months, it really hit me hard. So yeah, so they did the studies with law, within law, comparative studies, what's happening, as I just mentioned. But there's something else that they also came down to. This was the gold mine, as far as I'm concerned, because this is the whole thing. There's another aspect that they came down to. It's an aspect regarding legal education. Taking away legal research, legal writing, there is one thing that they found, that legal studies requires you to have, because you can't study law without the skill set, and you can't go and practice law without the skill set. What they found was, they found that legal education has to teach you how to think like a lawyer. Now, this is something exceptionally specific. It's the following. Thinking like a lawyer, firstly, obviously, is sharpening your intellect. That's obvious. The second thing is you need to be able to look at things from a whole bunch of angles. One thing, you have to take a 360-degree really kind of perception, have a 360-degree perception with regards to something that's being given to you, right? You know this. Look at something from all goddamn angles. But here's the other thing. And here's where things get really, really crazy. What law actually teaches you, and this is the big thing, guys, what law actually teaches you is it teaches you, pay close attention, it teaches you to problem spot. Now, problem spotting means that it's your ability to spot risk or potential downside in a situation, ability to ask what could go wrong, who might be at fault, who's liable, culpable, whose responsibility it is, are there any exceptions, what loopholes exist. But here's the thing, cognitively, what this means, mentally, and this is a mental skill set, mentally what this means is that you have to focus on or anticipate what could go wrong, where the negative aspects, where the problem lies. Where the problem lies, because it's about spotting risk. It's about spotting risk. So where are the possible, you have to look at this thing and consider it in light of where is the problem, not so that we can find the solution. But remember, the orientation is not towards the solution. The emphasis is finding the problem. The orientation, the predominant exercise is looking for where the problem is. Now, technically, what this means is that this way of thinking, this way of evaluating, cognitively speaking and technically speaking, this way of evaluating and looking at something of how things can go wrong, technically it's a negative thinking trait. Remember, positive thinking is like, everything that could go right. Remember, you can't do that with an assignment. You can't do that with a test. You can't take a test or an assignment and assume, everything's in place. It doesn't work like that. So the orientation is not towards the positive. You can't trust this thing. The orientation is towards where is the problem. And I need to find the problem. But here's the other thing. Remember, the other thing that I just mentioned is that you're looking for you're looking for the problem from more than one angle. You become nitpicky with regards to looking for problem within the test, within the assignment, right? It's the same thing with law as well. Similar thing. Client comes in, get the facts, need to find out, where the problem lies so that we can find a solution. But remember, the orientation is to looking for the problem. Here we go. Now, bear this in mind, because this is a cognitive skill set. It's not like a It's not like a blacksmith where his tool set is a hammer. You take the hammer, put it down. When you go home, you just leave the hammer. No, because this is a cognitive skill set. Because what you were doing and you were evaluating is cognitive. What starts happening is it influences the way you start evaluating outside of the lecture hall, outside of your tests, outside of your assignments. In other words, it starts integrating into how you start evaluating yourself, your life, when something happens, or the potential for something to happen, your relationships with people. It has an effect on that. Now remember, this skill set is absolutely needed for when it comes to law. Your ability to problem spot, absolutely needed. And you need it. I'm not saying don't use it, don't have it. But here's the thing. That skill set does not belong in relationships. That's why lawyers have high divorce rates as well. It does not belong in relationships. It has effects, certain effects in terms of character. That's why I'm doing, in part 2, I'll be doing lawyer personality specifically, because then you'll see this way of evaluating has a way of influencing this way of evaluating has a particular way of molding a specific type of personality or character traits. That's why it can actually literally be characterized. Something like lawyer personality can be characterized. But the skill set is not needed, and it is not needed, and it is not useful at all outside of the university, because it has devastating effects. Hence the research that's been done, hence prevalence of depression, hence student law student tendencies towards depression as well. So that starts to integrate. So this ability starts integrating in how you start evaluating other areas outside of university. If you found this interesting, please drop me a comment. Look, we're in this boat together. You would not have been the only one who's gone to see a psychologist. But remember, guys, this doesn't apply to every single one. Some people really do have, have an ability to really bounce back really quickly. So this doesn't apply to everyone. If it applies to you, then it applies to you. If it doesn't, then please keep your comments, civilized, if you don't mind. I went through the same thing. That's only why I'm sharing this, and I'm sure some other people also went through the similar thing. So please share and like and comment, and stick around for part 2, where I'll be sharing lawyer personalities specifically. Thanks.